Jewish idea of poverty actually is very interesting because it doesn't have anything to do really with a set amount of money or goods. It's when someone feels they are lacking. So in theory, you could have someone who has very much and they could still feel very poor. And at some level, you have to serve them at the same level you serve someone who is poor. But beyond that, there is a basic level of poverty which is sort of put in terms of the Torah. This is the person who is so poor they don't have their own field to work in, and they're allowed to come and pick the gleanings, the leftover bits in one's field, and go to the corners of your field as well and take those pieces. Someone who has no field, is allowed to come into your field and take what they need. Judaism says every action you do makes a world of difference. That's why it's a religion full of details. From the moment you wake up in the morning till you go to sleep at night, it's a religion that demands details, not for their own sake, because details matter. Each individual is a world of responsibility, makes a world of difference. That idea is I think, at the basic for what, not only how to think about poverty, but how to think about globalization. If we only knew how much each company pays to make sure we buy the right Coca-Cola, make sure we buy the right hairspray, they care about our choices, but we don't care enough about our choices. And we can make a difference towards changing the way the world works now, the way inequality works now, the way those who have not the power and the money can get those items. These things can make a difference if we make sure our choices are filled with responsibility, that what I do right now when I walk into every supermarket really makes a difference. The other idea that Judaism tries to get towards is what God made a promise that he said, as a nation at Mount Sinai, at the point of revelation, the Jewish people are said, become a mamlechet kohanim, a nation of priests. It doesn't mean that everyone should be up here doing a sermon, because what a kohen was, a priest was a recognition of every priest in the ancient world was someone who could read and write, someone who had education. So God's promise is that instead of having education be in one field, one group, one elite, education should be for the entire nation. It should be able that everyone should access, learn to read and write. It shouldn't be a group of scribes who can do it. That concept, I think, is key. Education is a lot of the ways it can solve a lot of the poverty issues in the world, through education. The people of the book, as Jews who call ourselves the people of the book, have an obligation, really, to envision a world where everyone can, should, and is possible to be educated at the highest level. That's what it means to say education is not just in the realm of a certain group or associated with how much money you have, but it's a mamlechet kohanim should apply to the entire world. Everyone can be the priest, can be the elite. It's an egalitarian system when it comes to education. With those two ideas, that we can make a difference in every act, and that everyone's entitled to education. I don't know what causes poverty, but I know those might be a way towards solving some of the issues. There's a Jewish thinker called the Rambam, Maimonides. Maimonides gives a list of the most effective way of giving tzedakah, giving charity. At the top of his list is a pretty radical idea. He says the best kind of charity, the best way of giving aid is when you teach a man to fish. That's the best way of giving aid, because he'll come to you once, teach himself to fish, and then he'll never need you again. The most effective way of giving aid is the most sustainable way. Teaching individuals, communities, countries how to do it on their own. Yes. Oftentimes that takes an initial outlay of resources. The people in those countries who have been promised monies they're not getting don't get to vote in our elections. Yes. And the people in this country that get to vote in our elections don't get to see how much money really has gone into those countries. So if you ask the average UK citizen, average UK voter, how much you think your country gives towards developing world, they usually give it a 10, 15% of GNP. Right? Now we know that's outrageous. Nothing like that has ever been given into these developing aid projects. But as long as the politicians are speaking about it, they oftentimes don't back up what they are saying. Why not? Maybe because we haven't done our task. You know, there's a, it's all of our responsibility to push our politicians, to push our leaders, to stand up in my synagogue and say there's something going wrong here. Yeah, there's something going wrong here, that we give more for Trident submarines than we do to help people out of abject poverty. Politicians necessarily are thinking about the next election. So the most they're thinking ahead is 4, maybe 5, maybe even 10 years ahead. The issues around poverty are so intractable, we have to be thinking 50 years ahead. To really solve the problems, it requires 50-year plans. For better or for worse, most religious leaders can't be fired very easily. Yes? So it's hard to get us off the stage when we get up here. At some level, we are allowed, because we can't lose our job in 5 years, we should be the ones thinking, speaking out for the 50-year plans, for the long-term future of a world. This is true for global issues. This is true for issues of poverty. This is true for the environment as well. If the religious leaders aren't taking into their hands, taking real ownership of these issues, who will? When religions come together, it can be very powerful, and for the politicians, sometimes it's very frightening. I've had the experience of trying to get ideas passed by 10 Downing Street, and if you go and say, we have 100 people here supporting this idea, they maybe give you a thank you very much. But if you say you have 100 religious leaders from different religions, they take that very seriously. They understand that if divides between Judaism and Islam, between Christianity and Judaism and Hinduism and Islam can all be divided, they understand that there's something really going on, that there's an issue here that transcends what usually divides us. Yes? We hear a lot in the news, in the world, about the walls, whether it's physical walls like there are in Israel, or the spiritual or the political walls that are set up between the religions. When political leaders see that we're willing to cross over those walls, then they are motivated to act because we have been motivated to act. And I think probably it begins with that notion of joining together, because our messages are so deeply alike. Most religions talk about the need to care for a stranger. You go around the religious spectrum, whether or not you're talking about loving your neighbor, whether or not it's a stranger in your community, a stranger in the next community, there's always a speaking about the person left out. Religion speaks very well to that. Here, when it comes to poverty, we are talking about the stranger, the person who is different, the person who needs our help. It's a voice that religion can give, because oftentimes those who are poor don't have a voice in our society. They lack that voice. And it's up to a religious tradition to give them back their voice. There is no easy answer to say what's going to make a difference in poverty. There are, however, I believe, 2 very basic Jewish ideas that can help us here. And if permit me, I'll elaborate on them. The first idea is oftentimes people feel in this global world that their voice, their actions count for next to nothing. They have no real power, no real say. So just the other day, I was actually in a supermarket and watching a husband and wife trying to pick out chocolate. And one of them said organic, and the other one said fair trade, and they couldn't agree. And finally, they gave up. They said, doesn't matter anyway, and they bought the cheapest chocolate they could, because they feel overwhelmed by the choices and by the global world makes each of us feel so minutely small that what can our actions really change? All the boundaries around tariffs, I would say this is probably the first place to start. We talk about, everyone talks about fair trade, issue of fair trade. It'd be much fairer trade if we would stop taxing all the produce coming in from countries like Kenya. Yes. Because basically we are paying our farmers in the UK, in Europe, in the European Union, to grow produce that we could grow much more cheaply in other countries, and then undercutting the market. Yes. So they're allowed to get their produce in much cheaper than the actual price of this produce. We need to hold our politicians to account. People who are below the poverty line in America, they still have their cable television, and most of them still have 1 car, if not 2. Yeah, and they're getting enough meals on their table most evenings. So poverty in America is not like poverty in developing world. People in America are not living on £1 a day. So it may be, in a subjective sense, in the context of America, being poor is very different than being poor in other places in the world. Nonetheless, like we talked about earlier, it has to be taken seriously because you're not poor in relation to the global world, you're poor in relation to your neighbor. Yeah, if you experience your lack and that depresses you, at some level it becomes an obligation to fix that issue, fix that problem. There's a very strong and growing problem in California with the haves and the have-nots. We all see in the movies and the television the haves. There is a world around that we don't see. Ironically enough, Hollywood is filled with a very poor percentage. People there are very poor. So most of the rich people don't live in Hollywood anymore, and the movies aren't made in Hollywood anymore. Hollywood is a downtrodden part in Los Angeles. So a lot of the images of what we see on television hides the fact of the real poverty that is just running under the surface in America. People talk about the impossible. One could imagine if you and I were slaves in Egypt 3,500 years ago, and someone said, very soon we're all going to go free. We're going to wander the desert like free men and women with our children. And you look around you and see the most powerful regime of all time, the Egyptian government and its army, you would laugh in their face. You would say to them, there's no way we're ever going to be anything but slaves, and our children will be slaves, and that's just the way the world is. And it took a couple things. It took Moses and dynamic leadership. It also took a willingness to be able to have hope in a future that was different than the reality that is now. And really, the incredible projects of this time, whether or not it be putting a man on the moon or setting up a system of clean water that's accessible to everyone in this country, these things require strong leadership and a deep sense of hope. That combination is a winning combination. And if we have that, then how dare we say we can't accomplish the fact? It just came out a report that a third of human beings in this world don't have enough to eat, don't go to bed hungry every night. But a third of human beings in this world are overfed, eat too much. We have enough resources. It's just getting it to the right people. It's just demanding it go into the right direction. The issue is not the bounty of the world. God has promised us a world of bounty. From Adam and Eve, we were promised a world of bounty. The problem is we keep getting in the way.